Thank you to Canadian Religious Freedom Summit for inviting me to speak to you today. As you've heard, I'm the senior pastor of Calvary Church, Toronto. And Calvary is a thriving church located across from one of the busiest transit stations in the inner city. We have the privilege to be reaching out to some of the most vulnerable people in our community. In fact, one of our missions as a church is to our community's most vulnerable seniors. Calvary Church began in 1929 and has always been a strong gospel witness here in Toronto since its inception. In 1973, under the leadership of our senior pastor, Dr. Gerald Griffiths, a 14-story retirement home was added to the church campus called Nesbet Lodge. Eventually, as the residents grew older, it became a long-term care health facility for seniors needing medical care. In 1990, another tower was built on our campus called McClintock Manor, which now provides social housing for seniors in our community. Since the pandemic, both towers connected to our church have become a refuge for homeless seniors who have no family. About 30% of the capacity of both homes serve our city in this way. The Nesbet Lodge nonprofit corporation oversees both Nesbet Lodge and McClintock Manor and is governed by the membership of Calvary Church. And as senior pastor, I serve on their board as a director. It is a complex organization governed by the church, but also under the Ministry of Health, Ontario's Long-Term Care Association, Social Services. In February 2017, our Nesbet board was visited by a lawyer from what is now called Advantage Ontario to communicate information from the Ontario government. She brought along with her an ethicist with a PhD from the University of Toronto, and we were warned that we could face fines or worse if we refused to allow doctor-assisted suicide at our facility, despite it being on church property. We were pressured with economic incentive that our healthcare system would save millions of dollars if MAID progressed as planned by our government. Well, that day, I also brought an ethicist and theologian with a PhD from University of Toronto, my dear friend, Dr. Stan Fowler. And thankfully, his talk was first on the agenda. Despite the pressure we endured, the day ended with a decision by our board that we would not allow MAID at our long-term care home, and that we would make it very clear on our website for anyone who applied to live here. Thankfully, our church congregation backed us up 100%. But for us as a church, this stance is much more than preventing MAID on our property. We feel strongly that with proper emotional and spiritual care and excellent palliative care for the dying, that we are making a difference. And part of that difference is in making stronger human connection with the most vulnerable people around us. In fact, I've hired a new full-time Christian chaplain who will be starting this coming Monday. He speaks Greek as well as English, and many of our residents come from our Greektown community, so they will be happy about that. Because here's the reality. According to a survey of MAID recipients, the primary source of their intolerable suffering is the loss of ability to engage in meaningful life activities, with 86% experiencing this. In other words, most people are asking to die not because of physical pain, but due to a lack of meaningful activities. However, my job as a pastor isn't done. I want to expand our volunteer base to come alongside people who have given up on life. With the influx of new residents to our home without family, this is even more critical for us. Well, another thing our church is involved in, our church also hosts weekly hot dinners and provides free clothing during 5 of the coldest months of the year, weekly, along with spiritual care for 70 to 100 vulnerable adults who struggle with poverty. Many that attend struggle with depression, mental illness, drug abuse. Many face home insecurity. Just 2 weeks ago, one of our guests asked for prayer. He is without a job. He is one step from being away from being homeless. And he wrote on his prayer request card that he would rather commit suicide than live on the street. And he's already contacted MAID to end his life. And so both of the communities that we serve, seniors and those with mental illness, have been threatened by doctor-assisted suicide or MAID. Recently, I presented a seminar for our church family on a Sunday morning about the government's law expanding MAID to those with mental illness, and why it's such a terrible idea for our country, both spiritually and socially. After the seminar, there was a lineup of people wanting to sign a petition demanding a halt of this law being implemented. But there was another response I wasn't expecting. Several Christians, even people close to me, confided that during times of deep depression in their lives, they would have seriously contemplated taking that irreversible step, and that they were so grateful that this law hadn't been passed then. They hadn't taken a permanent solution to what was a temporary problem in their lives. As a pastor, I've become increasingly aware of two things this past decade, especially as I've worked with lonely seniors and with people facing mental illness. First, some seniors are feeling pressured to end their own lives. Some are afraid that their family members, who don't always have their best interests in mind, will impose their will on them, and that they will be too weak to resist that pressure. Second, when people say that they would rather die than live, or even sometimes Christian seniors who say, "I want to go to heaven now," that doesn't mean that they want doctor-assisted suicide. Rather, it's a cry for help, saying, "I need other human beings to come alongside me, to be with me, to comfort me, to advocate for me." And so today I'd like to encourage you with a challenge. Step out of your comfort zone and befriend a senior who might be struggling with loneliness. Become a visitor to a long-term care home. And if there's training involved, take the time necessary to complete it. Or get involved in a mental health support group, as I did when I was pastoring here in Ottawa. Or volunteer at a dinner program for those most at risk. There's a verse in Proverbs that always jumps out at me when I read it. And it's Proverbs 24:10-12. If you falter in a time of trouble, how small is your strength? Rescue those being led away to death. Hold back those staggering towards slaughter. And if you say, "But we knew nothing about this," does not he who weighs the heart perceive it? Does not he who guards your life know it? Will he not repay everyone according to what they have done? Well, thank you for listening today, and may God have mercy on our country.